Welcome to Cheater Confessions. Let's get started with today's story. I used to believe that marriage was about love, trust, and effort. That's what I thought when I married Grace 7 years ago. I wasn't perfect, but I was a committed husband. I worked hard, made sure the bills were paid, and always put her needs before mine. But something changed, slowly at first, so subtly that I ignored it. It started with small things. Grace stopped greeting me at the door when I came home. She stopped texting me throughout the day like she used to. At first, I thought she was just tired, maybe overwhelmed with work. But then, even at home, it felt like I was just there. She barely looked at me. She barely spoke to me. Nights that used to be filled with laughter and conversation turned into her sitting on the couch, scrolling on her phone, or disappearing into the bedroom early. The intimacy that once connected us? Gone, like a candle blown out in the wind. I tried to be patient. I asked her, "Is everything okay?" over and over again. "I'm fine," she always said, never looking up from her phone. But she wasn't fine, and neither was our marriage. I started noticing the pattern, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I was always the one reaching out. If I didn't text her first, the conversation wouldn't happen. If I didn't initiate a hug or a kiss, there was no affection. If I didn't plan date nights, we didn't have them. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that maybe she was stressed. But deep down, I knew. People make time for what matters to them, and I was no longer on that list. Every time I suggested something to bring us closer, she had an excuse. "I'm too tired. I have a headache. Maybe another time." But another time never came. One Friday night, I decided to do something special. I left work early, stopped by the store, and bought everything I needed to make her favorite meal: pasta with homemade sauce, garlic bread on the side, a nice bottle of wine. I wanted to surprise her, remind her of the way we used to be. I set the table, dimmed the lights, even lit a few candles like I used to when we were newlyweds. I waited, excited, hoping tonight would be different. She walked in around 7 p.m., tossing her bag onto the chair. "Hey," I greeted with a smile. She barely glanced at me. "Hey." Then her eyes flickered to the table, to the meal I had spent hours preparing. She didn't smile. She didn't look touched or happy. Instead, she muttered, "I already ate." I stared at her, feeling my chest tighten. "You already ate?" I repeated, my voice quieter. "Yeah, I grabbed something with the girls after work," she said, slipping off her shoes. Then, without another word, she walked over to the couch, sat down, and pulled out her phone. Like I wasn't even there. I sat across from her, waiting, hoping she'd notice my disappointment, that she'd at least acknowledge what I had done. But she just kept scrolling, her face lit by the screen, completely detached from me and from what was supposed to be our night. After a few minutes, I finally spoke. "Grace." She didn't look up. "What?" "Are we okay?" She let out a sigh, the kind you give when someone is wasting your time. "Justin, why do you keep asking me that?" "Because we don't talk anymore, because you don't even look at me the way you used to." She rolled her eyes. "I'm just tired. Not everything has to be some big problem." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to tell myself that maybe she really was just tired. But deep down, I knew. She wasn't tired. She just wasn't interested anymore. I let it go for a while. I kept convincing myself that I was overreacting, that every couple goes through rough patches, that she'd snap out of it. But the truth was, I felt like I was living with a stranger. She wasn't my wife anymore. Not really. She was just someone who lived in the same house as me, someone who barely acknowledged my presence. It was like I had been demoted from husband to some irrelevant background character in her life. And then came the night that changed everything. We had eaten dinner. Well, I ate. Grace had barely touched her food, scrolling through her phone the entire time. After finishing, I got up and cleaned up, things she used to help with, things we used to do together. When I walked back into the living room, she was curled up on the couch, still glued to her phone. Her face was blank, illuminated by the glow of the screen, completely detached from the world around her. I stood there for a moment, watching her, feeling something heavy settle in my chest. Enough. I walked over and sat beside her. "Grace, we need to talk." She didn't look up. "About what?" "About us. About this distance between us." She sighed, finally putting her phone down. She didn't look upset. She didn't look nervous. She just looked bored. "Justin, I don't know what you want from me." I stared at her, feeling my jaw tighten. "I want my wife back." She scoffed, crossing her arms. "I haven't gone anywhere." I let out a slow breath, trying to keep my frustration in check. "Then why do I feel like I'm married to a ghost? We haven't been close in months. You barely touch me. You barely speak to me. You don't even act like you want to be in the same room as me." She rolled her eyes. "I told you I'm tired. Can't you just understand that?" "Tired? You're tired all the time. That's all I ever hear. But all I see is you making excuses to avoid being close to me." She scoffed, shaking her head. "Oh, so now you know how I feel, huh? Well, if I feel like it, I will. And if I don't, then I won't. Simple as that." And then she said it. "What I do with my body is none of your business." The words hit me like a slap. My mind stuttered for a moment, trying to process what I had just heard. "What?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She leaned back against the couch, arms still crossed. "Just because we're married doesn't mean I owe you anything." I felt something inside me crack. I wasn't asking for something I wasn't willing to give in return. I wasn't demanding. I was begging for connection. "Grace, I don't think you understand. This isn't about obligation. This is about love. About being close to the person you chose to marry." She let out a dry laugh. "You're making this way more dramatic than it is. Not everything has to be about you, Justin." Silence. A cold, suffocating silence stretched between us. That was it. That was the moment I knew. I was the only one holding on. And I was done. I stared at her, really looked at her. This woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with. And all I saw was someone who had already let go of me a long time ago. For months I had begged for scraps of affection. I had made excuses for her coldness. I had tried to convince myself that if I just worked harder, if I just waited longer, she'd come back to me. But now I saw the truth. She wasn't coming back, because she had already left. She had checked out of this marriage long before this conversation. She had just been waiting for me to catch up. And I finally did. Something inside me shifted, like a weight I had been carrying for years suddenly lifted. I wasn't angry. I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't even sad anymore. I was just done. I stood up. "All right." Grace frowned. "What does that mean?" I walked over to the chair, grabbed my jacket and slid it on. "It means I hear you, loud and clear." She let out a dry, almost amused laugh. "So what? You're leaving?" I looked at her one last time, taking in the sight of the woman who used to be my everything. "Yeah, I am." I didn't yell. I didn't slam the door. I didn't try to make some dramatic exit. I just walked out. And for the first time in a while, I felt free. I checked into a hotel that night. I didn't know where else to go. My hands were still shaking when I handed over my credit card at the front desk, my mind still reeling from what had just happened. I sat on the edge of the stiff hotel bed staring at the wall, waiting for something to hit me. Regret, sadness, anger. But all I felt was exhaustion. For the first time in years, I wasn't fighting anymore. I thought about texting Grace. A part of me expected her to reach out first, to ask where I was, to at least pretend she cared. But the hours ticked by, and my phone stayed silent. A day passed, then another. Nothing. And that's when I knew I had been right to leave. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't devastated. She wasn't even curious about where I was. She had gotten so used to me always being there, always chasing after her, that she assumed I'd come back on my own. But I wasn't coming back. A week later, I finally got a message from her. "Are you really leaving over this? Grow up?" I stared at the screen, rereading the words over and over, waiting for some kind of emotion to hit me. But I felt nothing. That was all I needed to know. I filed for divorce the next day. At first, she didn't take it seriously. She thought I was bluffing, that I was trying to teach her some kind of lesson. Then the papers arrived, and suddenly it wasn't a joke anymore. That's when the calls started, the texts, the late-night voicemails, her voice thick with tears. "Justin, please, I didn't mean it. I'll do better, we can fix this. You can't just throw this away." But she was wrong. I hadn't thrown anything away. She had. A long time ago. Grace begged me to reconsider. At first it was just texts and voicemails, but then the calls became more frequent. She started showing up at places she thought I might be, outside my office near my gym. Eventually she tracked down my new apartment, knocking on the door late at night, her voice laced with desperation. A sharp contrast to the cold indifference she had shown before I left. "Justin, please. I know I messed up, but I can change. We can fix this." I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I had already given her every chance to fix this when it still mattered. She swore things would be different. But love isn't just words. It's actions. And her actions had already shown me where I stood in her life. I wasn't her husband. I was just someone she had gotten used to, someone she assumed would always be there no matter how little effort she put in. So I let go. I moved forward, piece by piece. Some nights were harder than others. There were moments I found myself reaching for my phone, tempted to call her, to fall into old habits. But then I remembered the way she looked at me that night on the couch. The complete lack of emotion when she said, "What I do with my body is none of your business." That wasn't something you said to someone you loved. That was something you said when you had already stopped caring. The divorce was finalized a few months later. Signing those papers felt surreal. A part of me had expected to feel regret, maybe a sense of loss. But when I placed my pen down and slid the documents across the table, all I felt was relief. I was free. With that chapter of my life closed, I started rebuilding. I focused on work, spent more time with friends, and even picked up some old hobbies I had abandoned during my marriage. And then I met her. Her name was Maria. She was different from Grace in every way. Where Grace had been distant, Maria was present. Where Grace had been indifferent, Maria made me feel seen. We met by chance, and before I knew it, conversations turned into dates, and dates turned into something I hadn't felt in years: happiness. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just existing. I was living. And then, one evening, Grace showed up. It was late, just past 8 p.m., when I heard the knock on my door. I hesitated before opening it, expecting maybe a neighbor, maybe a delivery I had forgotten about. But when I swung the door open, there she was. Grace. Her hair was a mess, her eyes red and puffy, like she had been crying for hours. She looked smaller somehow, like she had lost the confidence she once carried so effortlessly. "Justin," she whispered. Behind me, Maria stood in the living room, looking toward the door. Grace's eyes flickered past me, landing on her. Her face twisted. "Who the hell is she?" Grace snapped, her voice suddenly sharp. I sighed, already exhausted by the situation. "This is Maria, my girlfriend." Grace's mouth opened, then closed. Then she laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Wow," she scoffed, shaking her head. "You really moved on that fast, huh?" "Grace, why are you here?" I asked, my patience thinning. She ran a hand through her hair, her expression shifting from anger to something more fragile. "I tried dating Justin," she admitted. "I tried moving on, but nothing lasted. And now I realize it was always you. It was always supposed to be you." I swallowed, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Pity, maybe. Frustration, definitely. But love? No. That part of me had died the night she told me my feelings didn't matter. "It's too late, Grace," I said evenly. "I begged you to care when it mattered. I fought for us, and you didn't. Now you want to come back because you're lonely? Because dating didn't work out for you?" Her face twisted in anger. "I can't believe you're doing this to me," she snapped. "After everything we've been through." "No, Grace," I said, my voice firm. "After everything I went through." She stood there, breathing heavily, her fists clenched at her sides. "You think she's different?" Grace scoffed, her voice sharp with resentment. "She'll walk away just like I did, just like they all do." Maria didn't flinch. She simply slipped her hand into mine, standing by my side. Grace's expression shattered. She had expected me to let her back in. She had expected the old Justin, the one who always forgave, always waited, always stayed. But that man was gone. "We're over, Grace," I said finally. "Don't come back here again." She stood there for a moment longer, her mouth slightly open like she wanted to argue. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. I closed the door, locking it behind her. Maria squeezed my hand. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I turned to her, and for the first time in a long, long time I smiled. Yeah, I said, I really am. And I meant it. Thank you for watching.